What's going on, guys? It's Cimo, and welcome back to the top 100 Yu-Gi-Oh cards of all time. We only have 20 cards left, and that means that we've already covered so many good cards that we only have the most powerful left to go. So if you haven't already seen the previous video, I definitely recommend checking that out. We're covering cards all the way from when the game started off, all the way up until now. It's completely subjective, and it's a lot of fun. But before we get into it, big shoutouts to all of my patrons and YouTube channel members for their continued support. And if you also want to help support the channel out yourself, hit the join button down below or check out the links in the description. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. Starting us off with number 20, we have probably the best, or at least one of the best hand traps we've ever had in this game's history. Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring. I remember when Ash Blossom first came out, and someone came out with that video that basically said Ash Blossom was able to negate like several thousand cards because that's how just pretty much applicable the card was. And even though a majority of those cards might not be meta relevant, the fact that Ash Blossom is able to stop cards from being added from deck to hand, to stop monsters from being able to be special summoned, and to stop cards from being dumped into the graveyard directly from the deck, gave the card so much flexibility. I mean, Ash Blossom is able to stop some of the most powerful cards in this game, and that's what makes the card so appealing. There was a time where this card was hitting close to $100. I think it peaked at around 90, but that was justified because this card was basically an automatic 3-of as soon as it was released. And yeah, Ash Blossom can be a little bit format specific, but one of the greatest hand traps of all time, and I'm glad it's much more available for the public since it's now been reprinted multiple times. Now for number 19, we have probably the most powerful Xyz monster ever printed in this game, Shockmaster. Shockmaster really shocked the format because being able to just disable core mechanics of the game multiple times, like with just a single card, is just nuts. Like, it's utterly fucking broken that I can stop my opponent from using monster effects, using spell cards, or using trap cards. Depending on the type of deck that you're going up against, I mean, it basically can just spell their demise, and it was so easy to summon, especially when we got pendulum summoning. I mean, there was just so many crazy things that Shockmaster was able to do. This card is so unfair. This card should have never been made because the amount of just oppression that this card inflicts just by hitting the board is just insane. It's utterly ridiculous. Honestly, it is one of the best, if not the best Xyz monster ever printed, and that's why I had to put it on this list. But moving on to number 18, we go from the most powerful Xyz monster to the most powerful fusion monster ever printed. And if you haven't already figured it out, it's Elder Entity Norden. Fuck. I mean, Norden needs no introduction. This card, as soon as it was released, luckily in the tins, I mean, could you imagine if this card was like a short printed secret rare in a core set? Norden is just a beast. I mean, being able to take advantage of a card like Instant Fusion to special summon Norden, which then gets you back any other card, which basically gave you an automatic rank 4 play. Back in the day, this was just nuts. This card was so abusable, especially back during the Zodiac Fusion substitute days where you were able to just make Norden just like crazy. You were able to plus so hard before your opponent even managed to get a turn. A lot of people are really happy that Norden's banned. I'm happy that Norden's banned. This card is just way too powerful. Honestly, again, another card that probably should have never been made, but I guess for the time we did have it, it was a lot of fun, but I think a lot of us are glad that its time has come and gone. Now for number 17, we have a card that pretty much changed our whole perspective on deck building altogether, and it's That Grass Looks Greener. Yeah, remember that whole saying that 60 is the new 40? Well, grass is the sole reason for that phrase's existence. I mean, if you're playing a 60 card deck going up against an opponent with a 40 card deck, they basically had 3 automatic win cards that they were playing in that 60 card deck that if they happened to resolve, guess what? The deck with 40 cards pretty much had absolutely no chance. There were so many cool strategies that came from the 60 card era. I mean, there was like 60 card Paleozoic, 60 card Lightsworn. There were so many different variants. What I liked about it is that it actually made decks that may not have been relevant more relevant, because the fact that you had this card that was so powerful and basically just automatically won you the game made these strategies like Lightsworn actually viable, and we saw that for a very short period of time. Now that doesn't justify the fact that it was completely unhealthy and completely degenerate, but it's still really cool that a single card kind of changed how we looked at deck building altogether, and you even see nowadays players are not always going for the straight 40 or 41 cards. We see 50 card decks, we see 60 card decks that don't play grass, and yeah, it's still legal illegal in the OCG, but I think it's really cool that a single card could do this. Pretty much had a lasting impression on the game forever, and that's why I put it at number 17. Now for number 16, we've got one of the most broken as fuck spell cards from the old days of Yu-Gi-Oh! And if you played back in the day, you're gonna know exactly where I'm going with this. Dimension Fusion. We already talked about how powerful and broken Return from the Different Dimension was. Well, what if Return from the Different Dimension was a spell card? Yeah, that's basically Dimension Fusion. Now, being a spell card not only allowed you to play it during your own turn and not having to wait a turn for it to set up, but you were also able to abuse it with a myriad of different cards. I mean, Dark Magician of Chaos was able to abuse it, Magician of Faith was able to grab it back from the graveyard, Diamond Dude was able to send it and you were able to activate it without paying cost. Dimension Fusion was insane. And again, we've already talked about cards that summon just an absurd amount of resources, especially out of the banished pile. Think how easy it is to get cards banished that you could easily recur and possibly just go off into some insane link plays. Yeah, Dimension Fusion had to be banned. It was so powerful, especially in the Chaos days, that I don't even want to think about how crazy and degenerate this card would be in today's game. Now for number 15, we have, again, one of the oldest cards ever printed in this game, Change of Heart. Change of Heart was a real game changer because back in the day, being able to steal your opponent's resources was crazy, and Change of Heart has no cost. It's a normal spell card. It's one of the hardest things to stop. Even to this day, normal spell cards are just very annoying to deal with, and changing possession of the ownership of a monster is crazy. It doesn't care about position, so back in the day when there was flip monsters, you could get the value of something like a Morphing Jar or anything that your opponent may have in the graveyard. If it was a Magician of Faith, you would flip it up, get that back. That didn't seem overpowered, right? It wasn't once per turn. I mean, this is just, a classic example of a card that was just way too broken because they didn't exactly know how fast the game was going to accelerate, especially by 2018 standards. So yeah, we still play stuff like Mind Control, but imagine Mind Control with zero restrictions. Yeah, Change of Heart is so powerful and definitely deserving of a spot on this list. Now that brings us on to number 14. And for number 14, we have another card from the good old days, and that is Confiscation. Confiscation was, in my opinion, the best out of all of the hand disruption spell cards from the old days because, very similar to something like Forceful Sentry, having the information of what's in your opponent's hand is invaluable because then you not only get to rip a card from their hand, but you also get to see everything else they have, so you know everything to play around. Especially now that we have hand traps, this is so crucial because you could basically make an entire play knowing what your opponent has, and you can basically just soft lock them out of being able to play and just play around everything that they may possibly have, putting you in the most advantageous position possible. Now, discarding the card in their hand may not always be the best, depending on the type of deck that they're playing, but why I like Confiscation over the Forceful Sentry is most of the time you're going to want to hit their power cards. I mean, if you hit something like Tour Guide and Burning Abyss, they only have one Tour Guide because it's limited to one, and there's no way they're going to be getting that card back. Same thing goes for any of the power spell or trap cards. I mean, something like Soul Charge, or, just anything that you never want to see them get back, Confiscation is going to basically remove it from the game, and I find that slightly better than the Forceful Sentry because they have the chance to draw it again because it's getting shuffled back into their deck. You never really know. I'd rather just remove that variance from the card entirely. Confiscation just has one of the craziest legacies in this game. I think a lot of people are glad that it's banned, but definitely one of the most powerful cards ever created. But for number 13, we have one of the most powerful draw spells ever printed, Pot of Greed. Pot of Greed has to be high on this list because it's just so simple. Draw 2 cards. There's no drawback. There's no downside. You could use multiple in a turn. Like, how could it get any better than this? And yeah, it's only a +1 in terms of card advantage, but if this card were legal, every single deck would be playing it. There's no better feeling than playing back in the day when you have no cards in hand, no cards on the field, and you top deck a Pot of Greed. That is just one of the best, anime moments you could ever have in Yu-Gi-Oh! You draw 2 cards, and those 2 cards could get you back into the game immediately. There's something really just, poetic about Pot of Greed. It's one of the most just notorious and just popular cards to ever be printed. Everyone knows Pot of Greed. If anyone knows Yu-Gi-Oh! It's just like Dark Magician and Blue Eyes White Dragon. They probably know what Pot of Greed is, and I think that's just pretty much a testament to how incredible this card is. Now for number 12, we have not one, but 4 of the most powerful dragons ever printed in this game's history, and that is no understatement, the Dragon Rulers. I wanted to put all 4 of the Dragon Rulers together because I felt that just having them pretty much one after another pretty much would just take up spots for no reason. The Dragon Rulers changed the game forever. Prior to the Dragon Rulers release, there was never really cards that had like 3 effects on them. And not to mention, they didn't just have 3 effects, they had 3 of probably the most broken effects you could have ever imagined. I mean, Yu-Gi-Oh! Was accelerating to the pace that it was already getting out of hand, but the Dragon Rulers just took it to an entirely different level. Not to mention, back in the day, you had stuff like Draco Sack, you had Big Eye. I mean, there was just so much power behind each and every one of these cards. You know, I just can't believe that these cards left such a legacy and are pretty much revered as one of the strongest, if not the strongest deck of all time, which obviously is debatable, but I mean, everyone who's played competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Knows about the Dragon Rulers. They fear the Dragon Rulers ever coming off the ban list. Tempest just came off in the OCG, so I guess we're slowly starting to get to that point where maybe it's enough, but even outside of their own archetype, they can be splashed in other decks, and I think that's just something that's so incredibly cool about them in general. Just all upside, all powerful. Man, definitely deserving of this number 12 slot. But to wrap up this video at number 11, we have one of the most insanely powerful and degenerate trap cards ever to be seen in this game, Vanitys Emptiness. Yes, Vanitys Emptiness. You guys knew this was coming on here somewhere, and I had to put Vanitys Emptiness up here because this card literally just locks so many decks out from being able to play the game. There's so many degenerate ways to pretty much protect Vanities and keep it alive, even with its inherent drawback, which you think wouldn't be too difficult to work around because you just have to destroy any card for Vanities to be destroyed as well. But there's so many instances where players wouldn't even get the opportunity to play just because of the fact that they couldn't special summon. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is so highly dependent on the special summon that this card literally warped formats. I mean, there's so many instances where this card just wreaked havoc and has such a legacy in this game. People are still traumatized to this very day from Vanitys Emptiness. I know I am, but man, one of the most powerful cards ever created. I think it might be one of the most expensive cards ever printed at the common rarity because they were going for like 30 or 40 bucks back when it was a short print in Star Strike Blast, but man, what a legacy. Vanitys Emptiness had to take the number 11 slot and had to wrap up this video. But we still have 10 more cards to go. So if you guys thought these cards were crazy, it's only going to get crazier. So I hope you guys stick around. Thank you so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always. Subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh! Content. And if you found this video entertaining, consider supporting me on Patreon or becoming a YouTube channel member. Because just by showing your support in any way that you can, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh! Content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time.